Hi, I'm Uncle Hanzi, and this is Adam. Welcome to My Stories of Chinese Characters podcast series.
Hey, Uncle Hanzi. This is Adam. It's great to see you again, or hear from you again.
Hey, Adam, we were in Hangzhou. Marco Polo first visited Hangzhou. You remember Marco Polo?
Yeah, right? He's the one that introduced noodles to the West via...
Yeah, I think he also brought pizza to the West.
Oh, was that, I know like a Robin, it's kind of like Chinese pizza, right?
Yeah.
So, Hangzhou, that was a great experience. It's all about the threads, right? It's all about, looking good, getting the silk on, right?
Hangzhou is mainly noted for the silk. We have several Chinese characters related to silk. One of them is Si, which, if you look at the ancient character, it looks like two strands of string or silk that have been twisted together. And if you see that character anywhere, usually as part of another character, it indicates it has something to do with clothing or fabrics.
Oh, okay. All right.
There's another interesting character. Silk is made from silkworms. The character for silkworm is Can. And if you look at the traditional character, it has two insects below and the complicated looking phonetic pronounced Can. But in the simplified character, it's a insect below and on top is the character Tian. And that character actually originally did not mean silkworm. It originally meant an earthworm. But in order to simplify it, Tian and San, or when they simplified it, they changed a silkworm for an earthworm.
Okay. So I think because maybe there's more significance of the silkworm in Chinese culture than the earthworm. Is that why?
Yes.
Screw the earthworm. Let's call this silkworm.
Yes.
Gotcha. Oh my gosh. So how did Chinese learn to use the what the silkworm was making this cocoon, right? So that they can metamorphosize into their final stage of their life. I mean, it just amazes me that someone thought hey, we can use this shell to make clothes. That's crazy.
Yes, humans are quite imaginative. You look at a silkworm cocoon and you think, nah, that's rather useless. They eat mulberry leaves only, and they can't live in nature if, you have the silkworm eggs and they hatch, and if they were in nature, they just fall out of the tree and die. So you have to put them in a special place and you have to go pick the mulberry leaves and they eat voraciously. They even make a lot of noise when they eat, and they get real long and fat. And then when they spin their cocoon, they usually find someplace, a niche, and they spin a cocoon around themselves. And that cocoon is made of silk, and you can unwind it.
Wow. Okay. So is there some kind of significant story in Chinese history or anything to the silkworm and becoming some kind of sacred thing? Because there's other ways to make clothes, Yeah,
there's other ways to make clothes, but the character for silk, Si, you've heard of sericulture. If maybe Americans don't know that word. Sericulture means silk culture. And sericulture, the word ser comes from the Chinese word Si, which originally meant silk. So we have some English words that actually come from Chinese.
No, serene. You're talking about being tranquil, serene.
Oh, no.
S-E-R-E.
No. Serine is what do you call it? Serine is an amino acid which was originally extracted from silk. And so sericulture is the English word for raising silkworms. But it comes from the Chinese word Si, which means silk or fabric.
So what's significant about Hangzhou and that as being a hub along the Silk Road. I mean, like that's got to be a factor. I mean, if this is a place where silk is, it's like the center of silk and silk clothing, you have to appreciate the fact that this is a place where we are having cultures kind of come together and work together, right? And through commerce, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
how long ago was this going on?
Oh, yeah. Well, the silk has been around for several thousand years in China, I think. Marco Polo came in the 12th century and introduced Europe to the silk. And then they had, the Silk Road. It was a pretty long road from Europe to China back in those days, and a pretty dangerous road. Now we have the Silk Road, the Road and Belt Initiative, and they're building a high-speed Silk Road, a high-speed train Silk Road, all the way from Hangzhou to England.
So the Middle East and Europe and Africa, they're all just wearing like burlap, itchy wool.
And
they're trying to make tweed like 3-piece suits, but didn't have
we have cotton
luxury. Yeah, they got cotton. Yeah, but still, would you rather be laying against silk or cotton? What do you
silk.
Say?
We have another character in Chinese, Yi, which stands for clothes. If you look at the ancient character, you can see a head and shoulders, and you can see the folds of the old style clothes.
So literally the character is looking like what you would put on? Is that what you're saying? Or how it would look on you?
Well, it's, if somebody tells you what it looks like when you look at the ancient character, you can see that there's a head and shoulders, and then there's some wavy lines that indicate how, the clothes are folded over in front of you.
Dress.
The primitive clothes were just kind of wraparounds. They just wrapped over like a shirt that wraps around or wraps over, and like the ancient Chinese clothes.
So you can't have a character for clothing without the E.
You can, but most of the characters for any kind of clothing involve the E on the side. I suppose there are characters that don't involve that, but most Chinese characters, and about 80% of Chinese characters, they are called xing sheng zi. One part of it indicates the function, like in clothing, you will usually have an E on the side, which is originally a pictograph of some clothes. And then on the right-hand side, you will usually have a phonetic that indicates how to pronounce the word.
Got it. And so how far back does this go? How far back did you have to look in time, in history, to see where these characters were created?
Well, I've been studying thousands of characters for decades. Some of them are easy. Some of them you can look at the modern character and see. But most characters, you need to first trace them back to the seal characters, and they begin to look like something. But some of the characters are really hard to figure out, and you have to trace them back to the oracle bone characters, which were about 3,500 years ago, and then try to figure out what they were from the pictographs.
Right. I'm sorry. I'm just to go back to your process, because I find that part very fascinating. How do you know when you're going back through linguistic history that like this word, or this character, is no longer this same shape with the same lines? How do you know that matches, let's say, the modern simplified version?
Well, you can. It's like we have a book called the Shouwen Jiezi, which lists all the characters from the Han Dynasty. And you can look at the traditional characters, and then you can look in this book, and they will be changed. But if you think about it, and you go back step by step, and you find these characters, they don't look like the modern characters. But if you look at the sentences they're in, and you think about it, you can figure out and see how they are related to the more modern characters. And then you go back step by step. You have to study the seal characters first, and then you can go back before them. Once you know the seal characters, you can't go back from the simplified to the oracle bone characters because it's too big a difference.
You've actually shown this to me before, and I do see it. It's just that it really is wild. And you're right. When you get farther and farther back, it becomes more explicit and like literal. Right now, going back to clothing.
So we have a bunch of different kinds of clothes in China. We have, the Hanfu and the Qipao and the Tongzhuang. Have you heard of any of these Chinese types of clothing?
Your
wife probably has a Qipao.
What's a Qipao?
That's one of those dresses that skinny Chinese women wear.
Oh, okay.
It's tight-fitting.
So it's usually like embroidered with like a flowery design type of thing.
Yeah, it's usually embroidered with flowery designs.
Okay. That's exactly when my wife first came to the U.S. to meet my mother and sister and father and everything. Of course, my ignorance is showing because I had no idea that was a Jipa. What's the and you're right, it was silk, highly embroidered though.
Yes, and we also have a Zhongshan suit, which is black with nice buttons down the front. And there was a guy named Sun Zhongshan, which you may know as Sen Yat-sen. And he's famous for wearing that kind of suit.
Yeah, and you look good in that. I remember you trying on something like that.
Yes, I have one of those suits.
Okay, so interesting. Is that style also originating from Hangzhou, or is that just like just developing?
Zhongshan, I think it's originated from Guangdong someplace.
The Zhongshan suit, right?
Yes.
It's a pretty significant type of clothing, right, for the male of the species. Why is that significant?
If you see men, from not long ago, from 50 years ago to 100 years ago, they will often be wearing one of these suits. And sometimes in China, you can see people wearing Tang Dynasty clothing. Sometimes some of the women and some of the men like to wear it. Most Chinese wear modern clothing, but sometimes, if you're walking down the street, you can see some men or women wearing more ancient clothing, Han Dynasty clothing or Tang Dynasty clothing.
Right, but the Zhongshan suit is the Zhongshan suit part of the way back when, or is this more like revolutionary?
Oh no, this is modern. Sen Yat-sen, we know him in the West as Sen Yat-sen. In Chinese, it's Sun Zhongshan, and he is one of
literally he is the man who made the suit. Like the suit is named after him. Yes,
so he was one of the main leaders in overthrowing the Qing dynasty in 1912. And
so we're talking typical revolutionary garb, which I can picture. Is that what we're talking about?
Well, yeah, typical revolutionary guard from 100 years ago, as opposed to the Mao suit, which was from 50 years ago or 60 years ago. So it's a little different than the Mao suit.
Wow.
So we have the Sen Yat-sen suit and the Mao Zedong suit.
And was the Qing dynasty, what were they wearing? Was they?
They wore more traditional clothing. I'm not an expert on clothing. I'm more of an expert on Chinese characters. Oh yes, in China you walk down the street. I don't know about America. I haven't been there for 11 years, but if you walk down the street in modern China, you might see some young women, girls, doing cosplay, but you might also on occasion see young women, girls, wearing various traditional clothing that dates back maybe hundreds of years or even a couple of thousand years to the Han Dynasty. So, as I mentioned, most modern Chinese are wearing modern Western clothing, but it's not uncommon to see a Chinese walking around in a Tang Dynasty clothing or Han Dynasty clothing.
is that just for like to do a photo shoot? These moments in the street, these public moments where I see maybe two girls or young women or even older women wearing this anachronistic garb. I'm like, oh, it must be for some kind of advertisement, or they're doing some kind of branding. Are they role playing? What is the?
Well, traditional Chinese culture is pretty popular in China. And so some people, usually they're not doing anything special. They just like to wear it. Now, you have a special situation in the parks. In the morning, you have lots of usually women who go there to dance. And many times they will have their costume for their dancing. And so that's one area where you will see usually older women wearing some kind of traditional clothing. But because traditional Chinese culture is popular in China, it's not uncommon just sometimes to see a man or a woman just because they like to wear those kind of clothes, not because they're actually, making a video or anything like that.
So they're just living modern life, but doing it in historical clothing.
In China, it's also popular. You have like groups of people who like to study Confucius, or groups of people who like to study, like clubs of people who like to study Tang Dynasty poetry. And so they may also sometimes wear these clothes, just because they like them.
I know that. Okay, so in the West, we have Renaissance fairs. We have
like Renaissance fairs,
Civil War reenactments, that type of thing, and they're not walking through the streets though, wearing you don't see a Confederate soldier, walking into McDonald's. In fact, that would probably end up badly.
In the West, nobody ever wears these kind of clothes just walking down the street. Right. But in China, you will sometimes see people wearing these kind of clothes just walking down the street because, like I say, in China, traditional Chinese culture is a popular thing. In America, we have our American history, but we don't think about it all the time.
And we see that in shows, right? If you were to turn on the TV, Chinese TV, there's so many historical, docudramas and fictional, here we are 200 years ago, and there's kind of timid love relationship that won't ever be because of duty or whatever, and they're wearing these fantastic clothes with great long hair. I'm talking about men and women, right? You don't see that in on the media in the U.S. or in the West, for example. There are some, if you look at Downton Abbey, which is this British show that was that was a throwback, and there's some historical pieces, but for the most part, there is a deluge of lots of soap opera and action shows. They're taking place in a different time. Oh no, time.
Yes, in China, if you turn on the TV, you are most likely to see some kind of show that took place during the Tang Dynasty or the Han Dynasty or 2,000 years ago or 600 years ago. Whereas in the West, if you turn on the TV and you just see a show, it's probably a modern show. And it's,
right.
Yeah, and thus you happen to accidentally tune into a Shakespearean play or something. Almost everything on American TV is modern.
Or if they're doing something from the past, they may do something from it might do an 80s throwback. There's in the West, there's a lot of retro shows that are it's for people who are maybe middle-aged now and oh yeah, I remember the 80s type of thing, but they don't go back 250 years. They don't go back to British imperialism, that type of thing from in this mid 1700s. So
in China, it's very popular,
right? And I think it has to do with because their culture has a much larger timeline than Western cultures that might have something to do with it. So like 300 years ago in China is like, 40 years for us or 50 years for, a Canadian. It could be maybe a reason, but also there's something about like these shows. It's a very typical, like there's an element of restraint and like duty, honor. I mean, you could just tell by looking, saying, not being able to say what you want to say type of thing, but everyone knows you want to say it, who's watching, and even
yes, in China, well, it's part of Chinese culture. Whereas, the traditional, everybody talks about traditional Chinese culture. And there are things that everybody talks about that are Chinese and not Western. So this is, part of everyday China, everyday modern China. Whereas we don't talk about traditional American culture because it doesn't exist. But Chinese have 2,000 years of, tradition, actually several thousand years of tradition. No, America is only, a couple hundred years old, and we don't talk about European culture.
So, speaking of traditions, I have a very important experience to share with you, Uncle Hansa. It's about my Chinese wedding. I mean, I had a completely traditional Chinese wedding. What I was wearing, though, the whole time, though I did have my sunglasses on, I was all in red silk, and it was both constraining, but also I felt like, and a little bit gaudy. I loved it. And she was wearing exactly the same beautiful, mature, like I am ready now for this union. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but I mean, everything was silk, totally embroidered. I had to carry her down the 5 flights of stairs. I mean, I had to do 200 push-ups. I had to sing a Beatles song. I had to find a shoe. I had to carry my wife down flights of stairs. If I was wearing my typical like Western suit, first of all, probably throughout the process, I would probably rip a hole in the buttocks of the pants, like from squatting or doing whatever I had to do. And I had thrown away the tie because it was too constraining. It was the hardest day of my life. I mean, the point is, I looked good while doing it because I was wearing some red this jacket that I would like. That's what I'm saying. I was empowered.
Well, my weddings were much simpler. In fact, I insisted on it. I didn't want to spend a huge amount of money on something that was gaudy. So we invited a lot of people for a big dinner and feast and all. With 12 people at a table, and everybody got drunk and stuff like that. But mine wasn't as fancy as yours.
My older sister, she got married on top of a ski mountain. They were literally wearing she was dressed in white, but it was like a ski outfit, right? There's a ski resort called Loveland in Colorado, and they actually on Valentine's Day, which is February 14th, you could pay to have a minister come up and give you do a wedding. So, and then they do everything else is the same though. You do your vows, put on the rings, and then you ski down together, and then the reception's at the bottom of the mountain.
These days most people don't have such a fancy wedding, but 50 years ago it was said that the average Chinese spent 15% of their life income getting married and getting buried. And so when people got married, it was a huge affair. But also when they got buried, there was a huge affair. They would have a parade. They'd carry the body through the town, and people would dress up in special clothes for the funeral. White clothes and with armbands and things like that. So, which I find
totally contradictory to what I'm used to. You wear white clothes at the wedding, not red clothes. Red clothes is like, red light district, Amsterdam. Like this is like,
oh yes,
This is not what you wear at a wedding. But I understand white in China, like it's kind of like ghosts and death, right? It's kind of this like significance of passing on, paled from death, right? I
Yeah.
don't know. But anyway, go ahead. Tell me, what is your favorite clothing up to this point?
Well, my Zhongshan Zhuang, my Senyat Sen suit is my most fancy, or the one I like best. It makes me look like a communist, and my American friends think I've joined the party.
Okay.
That's about it.
Yeah, Uncle Hansa, can you guess it? I love Tai Chi clothing. My father-in-law, he's got all these like kind of these linen Tai Chi outfits, and yeah, and he gets them when he goes to these like conventions or like these tournaments. So I've like I start collecting them. I got like 8 or 9 of them, and so they when I was able to travel and go back home, I would keep like 2 of them, but then like I would give them as gifts because I don't know anyone in the West honestly that does Tai Chi, but my father-in-law takes it very seriously and he's really good at it. Now, as far as everyday wear, do you wear any like what do you sport? You're mainly like a t-shirt type of guy, right?
Yeah, I refuse to wear a suit and tie. When I was somewhere around 10 years old, I was forced to go to church, and I was dressed up in, a suit and tie and white shirt and cufflinks and stuff like that. And it was very hot, and the clothes didn't fit, and I thought I was going to faint or pass out. And from that time until now, I have absolutely hated suit and tie. It's the most disgusting uniform that anyone's invented. So I'm a t-shirt guy.
I go through phases myself. Right now, I'm kind of in my black phase. I have black shoes, black socks, black pants, black button-up shirt, and it's kind of like my uniform that I can wear when I'm working as a teacher. But when I was teaching like hard sciences, when I was a science teacher, I was playing by the rules. I was dress slacks and a tie. Yeah, that's what I go by. I am not a fan of labels. I always thought that like when I put on clothes or if I pick out clothes, I don't want like a big written statement on my chest. It's like the same thing as why
yes. In China, we have a bizarre tradition. I mean, in modern China, there's this bizarre thing that's happening is that Chinese will have clothing with huge English words on them. But 90% of the time, those English words or those words, they're not even words. They are meaningless words. 90% of the time, those words are meaningless in any language. And this has become some kind of style in China. I don't understand it. But it's sort of like Chinese tattoos in America. I've seen Americans with Chinese tattoos that were totally meaningless. And clothing is kind of a strange thing.
And that's what I feel about the branding on the clothes. It's like the reason why I never got a tattoo or would never get a tattoo is like I don't want people to see me coming. Like if I have something to say, ask me, or like I will let you know, like if you're interested. But I don't need to like I'm too open-minded to wear some statement on my chest or a back or whatever, or down the side of my leg, and so like that in itself. But it's I mean I could understand a different way of looking at it where it's like you are trying, you could take on an identity or whatever. But if you don't know what's being said on your chest or whatever, then that's problematic for me. I think you should.
Yeah, to some extent. If a woman is wearing rings and has a lot of makeup on and is wearing high fashion clothes, yes, I judge her. I think you can probably tell something about the person to some extent. I mean, you can't judge a person. In Chinese, they have a saying, clothes make the man and a saddle makes the horse. It means that the man depends on or is made by the suit, and the horse is made by the saddle. But you still need to be open-minded, and clothes aren't everything, but sometimes they tell you something about a person.
When we look at people, we only are looking at that moment, right? It's like a snapshot. And yeah, there is truth to that. I want to thank you for teaching me the characters. I learned so much about the loom, and now I just learned a new phrase. So thank you, and I can't wait for the next episode to talk to you more.
We're going to Daliangshan, which is one of the centers of the Yi ethnic group in China, which means it's quite different from usual China.
Oh, great. So I know nothing about regular China. Now I'm going to the non-regular China.
Yes.
Okay, well, all right. I look forward to that. Uncle Hanzi?
Yeah.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to My Stories of Chinese Characters podcast series. There are more stories to come, and you can tune to our podcasts on radio.cgtn.com or any other major podcast platforms to have a listen.
For the related videos, which you don't want to miss, because Uncle Hanzi in his jeans and t-shirt, it's like the Marlboro Man. You got to look at it. Okay, you can find them on the Learn Chinese YouTube channel and Facebook page. And we'll
see you in the next episode.
This is great. Join us next time on the next episode. Thank you.
Okay.